My name is Larissa Coe, and I am going to hopefully teach you a thing or two about conducting research. We are going to answer the question, what is research? Look into how to write a research question, and then how to find, judge, and cite sources, and then a little bit about organizing information. So Google defines research as the systematic investigation into and study of materials and sources in order to establish facts and reach new conclusions. So we want to conduct an investigation using solid sources to answer questions and learn. In order to answer questions, first you have to ask them. So that brings us to our research question. So you need to go into research with a question. In some assignments, you will be given a question to research, but in a lot of cases, you get to decide for yourself what you're going to research. So you need to come up with good research questions to guide the process. A research question should be clear. It needs to have enough specifics that the audience can easily understand its purpose without needing additional explanation. Focused. It needs to be narrow enough that it can be answered thoroughly in the space of the writing task. Concise. It needs to be expressed in the fewest words possible. It should be complex, not just a yes or no question. It should be arguable with multiple debatable answers. And it should definitely be interesting to you. Research takes a lot of effort, and it can be really rewarding, but it is less so if the topic isn't interesting to you. So here are some examples to illustrate what we were talking about. So the first example, here's an unclear research question. How should social networking sites address the harm they cause? And an example of a better one or more clear research question is, what action should social networking sites like MySpace and Facebook take to protect users' personal information and privacy? Now, when you're first looking into a topic, you might start with kind of an unclear question, and then as you go, you kind of figure out what your question really is. You just want to make sure to refine it and clarify by adding some specifics, like this one added MySpace and Facebook. Okay, the next one is, what is the effect on the environment from global warming? This one is a decent start, but in the good example, you can see it gets a lot more focused. What is the most significant effect of glacial melting on the lives of penguins in Antarctica? So that would be a lot easier to answer in just a paper or a presentation than answering the effect on the environment of global warming. That there's so many effects on so many different things and people that is way too broad. But then when we're talking about the effect of glacial melting on penguins in Antarctica, it's more focused and will guide the researcher in one direction more clearly. The last example is a bit too simple. It says, how are doctors addressing diabetes in the U.S.? And then the better example is, what main environmental, behavioral, and genetic factors predict whether Americans will develop diabetes? And how can these commonalities be used to aid the medical community in prevention of the disease? So you can refer back to this when you're writing your own research question. Make sure it is clear, complex, focused, arguable, concise, and interesting. And follow these examples on the right-hand column as well to be a model for you in writing a research question. So the next step after defining your research question is finding sources. We are so lucky these days that you don't have to go to a library or anywhere to do this. You can look up information from wherever you are as long as you have a computer or phone which has a computer in it. So one great place to find sources is search engines. And this is what most people use on an everyday basis to look up information. Search engines allow you to use natural language and sort by relevance. So these are things like Google and Bing. You just type a question or whatever, and you'll probably find information related to that. There is a ton of information. It is convenient, it's free, and unfortunately there's a lot of unreliable sources and advertisements mixed in with the rest of the information that's probably better. You can still find good information using search engines. You just have to do more work to look through it and make sure it's credible before using it in research. Databases, on the other hand, are a collection of reviewed, reputable sources. So you can go into it more confident that there won't be articles trying to sell you things or just simple blogs or information that people made up. Those are less likely to be found on databases. They're usually offered through schools, kind of like a library service, but online. And in Utah, we all have access to Utah's online library, which is a collection of databases. So databases take practice to use because it's not exactly like Google in that you can type whatever you want and find limitless information. It takes a bit more know-how to be able to use it, but I will show you how to use it, and then with practice, you will be able to get really reliable information fairly easily. So I'm going to pull up Utah's online library. If you're using a school computer, it should log you in automatically. If not, you'll enter in a username and password, which changes frequently, so I'm not going to give that to you here. But I would recommend that you ask your teacher or look around on the assignment that you're doing for a login to get in if you're going from home. You go to utahsonlinelibrary.org and go to K through 12 schools. And then there are two main ones that I want to show you. The two databases that are found in Utah's online library are EBSCO and Gale. These are also found on a lot of university level things. So it's a really cool tool that you have to work with. Even down to elementary school students get to use this. But the first one is called EBSCO. And so you can go into EBSCO High School. Within this is a lot of buttons that I don't want you to get overwhelmed by. You could either go to Explora or All Databases, which I will go to here. When you are looking through databases, these are the tips that I want you to remember. So you type topics and keywords rather than questions. You don't just go in and copy and paste your entire research question because it's looking for keywords and it's not as, smart as Google in trying to figure out what you mean from a long stream of text. If you are finding that you're not pulling up what you need to pull up, then I would try different keywords. Always work on changing the keywords if you're not getting what you're looking for. And then you'll see there are abstracts, which is kind of like a conclusion paragraph or summary paragraph that are attached to a lot of these articles. And those are a really great way to get an overview of information. So before you read an entire 10-page article, you could read the abstract and decide if it's useful to answer your research question. And then you can also filter things by date, file type, full text, and other options to find what you are looking for. So I'm going to pull one of these research questions just to experiment with. And I think I will go with the second one. What is the most significant effect of glacial melting on the lives of penguins in Antarctica? So I'm going to say that's my research question for this project. And I'm going to go into EBSCO host and pull some of my keywords. So maybe I'll look at glacial melting. Penguins. I think those are the biggest things that I need to look into. So here are all of the databases. I'm going to push continue. And I am going to paste in glacial melting right here. So when I'm skimming through all of the results, there are some things to look at. It tells me what type of article it is. So this is a periodical. Here's an academic journal. It tells me the title right here and just a little bit of information over here. So if I'm looking through this, I can look to see how well these sources will answer my question about glacial melting. If I end up having too much information, I could refine my keywords. So maybe glacial melting penguins. And this looks like it's going to do a better job of answering my question, just skimming through here. Let's say I keep finding information from a really long time ago. Everything's from the 1980s. In that case, what I can do is change this, which is the publication date. So if I want recent information, I could go from 2005 to 2021. That will eliminate the older texts. There are other limiters. You always want to have full text pulled up so that you can see the article that it's talking about. And it's useful to do peer-reviewed journals. That means that it's more credible than those that are not, because multiple qualified people have looked over them and determined that they are accurate. And I can decide what type of source I want to look at. So this has academic journals and journals. I could choose which one to look at. So let's say I find a good article. I click on here and it'll bring me to the overview page. Here's the abstract that I was talking about. So this gives an overview of what is in the whole text of the article. If I read that and decide that it's useful, then I can decide to use this source. One cool tool that databases usually have is a citation tool. So if I click Cite, I can just copy and paste my MLA citation from here instead of putting it together myself. And we'll talk more about that later. Okay, so that's a little bit about EBSCOhost. The other database that we have is called Gale. This one is one that I prefer because I find that it's easier to use, but I would recommend using both, especially if you're struggling to find sources that answer your question. So I just went to Gale and then Power Search right here, and it pulled up a similar type of search bar as the other one. I'm going to paste glacial melting penguins again right here. Okay, once I've searched, I can do filters on this as well. I can do things like publication date, set it to only be recent, subjects, document type. All of these can help you to narrow your results down. One thing I like about Gale as well is that it has it organized by type. So I can look through them this way in order to find what I need. Images can be useful in research as well. So other than that, it's pretty similar to EBSCO. You can go in, read your abstract, and then decide whether or not to read the whole source. If you want to read it, you just download it. You can add it to your Google Drive. And then down here is where I get my citation. And here is the full article. That's just a brief overview of the two databases that you can use on Utah's online library. Okay, we talked about finding sources using search engines or databases, and I gave you an overview of how to use EBSCO and Gale on Utah's online library. Now we're going to talk about how to judge sources. So we all know that there's a lot of biased, opinion-based, and false information on the internet. So we need to think critically and judge sources. You don't have to judge people, but you definitely need to judge the sources that you're using to determine if they are credible. Research calls for the most reputable sources. Others can weaken rather than strengthen your conclusions and your own credibility. So as an example, if your Aunt Susan let's say your Aunt Susan reposts a photoshopped, ridiculous thing, believing that it's true. You can look at it, and obviously things are photoshopped. It's crazy. The sources are not accurate. Not only is that kind of annoying to see false information spreading throughout the globe, but also it weakens Aunt Susan's credibility. So if you believe and share sources, especially in your research, that are not credible, then it's almost like we just want to throw the whole paper out as being not credible. So it's really important to look out for CRAP, which stands for Currency, Relevance, Authority, Accuracy, and Purpose. These are things to evaluate when deciding whether or not a source is credible and usable in your research. So currency refers to the timeliness of the source. If something was published 20 years ago, it may not be as accurate or up to date as information that was published 20 days ago. So the most up to date is likely the best information. If it's something historical that you're researching, this doesn't apply as well. You can look back into sources that were written a long time ago about things that occurred even longer before that. You also need to look into relevance. So how well does this source help answer your research question? I don't want you guys to spend hours and hours reading sources that don't actually answer your question. So when you're going through the abstract of an article, really make sure that your question will be answered, at least in part, by this article. Authority refers to the credentials, qualifications, and affiliations of the author or publisher. So, for example, a medical professor is going to be a better person to listen to about weight loss than Cardi B, or something to that effect. You need to find people that are qualified to talk about the things that they are talking about. Next up is accuracy. Accuracy is the reliability and truthfulness of the information. If you are looking at a thing that's clearly photoshopped and absurd and ridiculous, that's enough reason to throw it out as a source. And last of all, you need to look at the purpose. You need to find the reason that a source was created. Money is a huge factor, so please look at advertisements, sponsorships, things like that will influence what the speaker or author will say about a topic. So if you're trying to find out if oatmeal is healthy, then a study conducted by someone who sells oatmeal might be biased in oatmeal's favor. So really look into the purpose of the source. So research must be accompanied by citations. There are two huge reasons for this. One is to avoid plagiarism. You don't want to take someone else's work and claim it as your own. Not only is that unethical, but it's illegal. It's very critical that you don't write other people's words and say that they are your own. The next reason is to add validity to your conclusions. So if you're having a conversation and your friend gives you some fact, but then doesn't tell you where that fact came from or how they learned it, and you can't check it for yourself, then their argument is a lot weaker than someone who gives you a fact, tells you where it's from, and allows you to go search it yourself. So that's a huge reason to cite your sources so that readers can double check your facts, and also so that you're not plagiarizing. So the format for MLA citations includes all of the things in this list that are available. So we have the author, title of the source, title of container, other contributors, version, number, publisher, publication date, and location. And this is broken down with the appropriate punctuation as well. So author, period, title of source, period, title of container, comma, etc. You look through all the information you have about the source and then put them in that order, eliminating the things that aren't available. Here are some examples from Purdue OWL of different sources and how you would put them together. There are so many variations that my two recommendations for citations are One, to use Purdue OWL. It's the best source that I found to look for all things MLA. It explains it. It gives examples. The examples in my presentation are from this source. Or to use something called citationmachine.net, or another thing that does it for you. Citationmachine.net creates citations. You put in the URL, search it, it'll pull up the source. You add additional information that was missing, and you push complete citation. And then from here, it will put together a list of citations for you. You can see that I use this all the time. Even when making this presentation, I used citationmachine.net. It does a good job, in my opinion, and it's a lot more convenient than memorizing all of this stuff and putting it together yourself. But if you need to put it together yourself, Purdue OWL is the place that I would go. So in addition to citations on the works cited page, you need to include in-text citations when you quote or refer to a source within your paper. So if you give some kind of statistic or fact, whether or not it's in your own words, it's really important for you to put an in-text citation. So if you were to say the number of penguins increased by 100% in 1846, even if I don't use a direct quote, if I have that fact, I need to put the author's last name after that fact in my sentence so that people can cross-check that and so they know where that information is coming from. Usually, though, you will use direct quotes, so all of these are in quotation marks. And you put the author's last name in parentheses afterward with the page number, or in this case, you write the author's name within the sentence and then just put the page number in parentheses afterwards. The last example is when there is no author's name. This actually happens quite frequently, so don't panic. Just use the title or a shortened version of the title in parentheses after the quote. And lastly is a little bit about organizing information. You want to organize from the very beginning. If you go through, learn lots of cool information, maybe jot some things down and then realize you don't know what any of your sources were, you don't have your citations, you don't have quotes, you don't know what quote belongs to what, all of that is going to make it a lot harder on you in the long run. So from the start, have a system. You can use your own system, but just make sure you have a system and you don't get things mixed up. Okay, and then think outside the essay. Research is often turned into an essay for school, so you may hear research and groan because essays are not fun. But research can be. You can also present information as a presentation, a visual argument, and you can just do research to learn things and find credible sources to back up the things that you already believe, or even to debunk some things that you find online. When conducting research, it's kind of the more the better. The more research and evidence supports your side, the stronger your argument will be, as long as those sources are credible. Choose from the best and don't include quotes that are too lengthy. You don't want your paper to be all quotes, but you want to put a lot of quotes in to prove each point. So I would say as a minimum, if you're writing a research essay, each paragraph should probably have about 3 or 4 quotes to back up what you're saying. And again, they should be short quotes, not long ones. And then the last thing is to explain simply. Leonardo da Vinci says, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. So if you really, truly understand a topic in the research you read, that means that you should be able to explain it in a simple, understandable way. And that's what I want you to do. So when you write, speak, or present your information, don't make really complicated sentence structures or huge words that you don't even understand to try to sound smart. Show that you really understand it by stating it simply and clearly. Research is a wonderful way to learn about topics you're interested in, get answers to some questions, and find and strengthen conclusions of your own. It's not just for school, but I am really glad that there's such a focus on learning about it in school because it's so useful no matter what you end up doing with your life to figure out how to find true, valid information. And I would be such a hypocrite if I didn't put a works cited page. So here are references. And if you have any questions, message your teacher for more information or clarification. Okay, have fun researching.